Good evening. I'm Jen Wallison, Mayor of Menlo Park. Welcome to the City Council's January 31st Special City Council meeting. This is a hybrid meeting with City Council, city staff, and members of the public participating in City Council chambers in accordance with public health guidelines for in-person meetings and participating remotely to promote social distancing in this federal, state, and local emergency. For those in virtual attendance, please note that there is a globe icon near the hand feature on your screen. This will allow you to listen and participate in tonight's event in Spanish. If there are any members of the public attending in person at the City Council chambers who need to access interpretation, we have an interpretation station located at the back table. Our interpreters this evening are Javier Moren, Lorna Silva, Gabriela Zayas Olom, and Isabel Gonzalez Gutierrez. Thank you all for your time and services this evening. These interpretation services will conclude at 10 p.m. So let's hope we get through this by then. I'm going to allow for interpretation of what I just said.
Si hay algún miembro del público asistiendo en persona en las cámaras del Consejo de la Ciudad que necesitan accesar a interpretación, por favor pasen por la mesa de atrás donde tenemos la estación de interpretación. Nuestros intérpretes de esta noche son Javier Morrone, Lorna Silva, Gabriela Saya Salón e Isabel González Gutiérrez. Gracias a todos los intérpretes por su tiempo y sus servicios esta noche. Los servicios de interpretación concluirán a las 10 de la noche.
Thank you. I would now like to introduce City Council members and staff present. Vice Mayor Cecilia Taylor is joining us remotely this evening. City Council members Maria Dorr, Drew Combs, and Betsy Nash are with me on the dais. Staff present include City Manager Justin Murphy, City Attorney Nira Doherty, City Clerk Judy Heron, and Deputy City Clerk Sarah Sandoval. Deputy Clerk Sandoval, would you please provide instructions to the City Council and members of the public on how this meeting will proceed?
Thank you, Mayor Wallison. For those who would like to make public comment this evening, if you are attending virtually, you'll be able to use that raised hand feature at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a landline or cell phone, you'll be able to press *9 to raise your virtual hand. Those of you who are in attendance in person in the chambers with us this evening, we'll ask that you go ahead and fill out a speaker card at this table to my right and return it to the clerk's desk. Thank you, Mayor Wallison. That concludes the instructions.
Thank you, Ms. Sandoval. We have one item on the agenda this evening, which is a public hearing. Public hearings are a formal proceeding held in order to receive testimony from all interested parties on a proposed issue or action. Please note that depending on the number of public speakers on this item, C1, public comment may be limited to 2 minutes per speaker. Tonight's public hearing is C1. Consider 1, the Planning Commission's recommendation to adopt a resolution to certify the subsequent environmental impact report, adopt California Environmental Quality Act findings, adopt a statement of overriding considerations for significant and unavoidable impacts for the Housing Element Update Project, and approve a mitigation and monitoring program. And 2, the Planning Commission and Housing Commission's recommendations to adopt a resolution to amend the general plan to update the housing element for the 2023 to 2031 planning period. To introduce this item is Principal Planner Tom Smith. Mr. Smith.
Good evening, Mayor Willison and members of the City Council. Thank you for meeting this evening. And I have a brief presentation that I will go ahead and open. All right, so with me this evening is Deanna Chow, the Assistant Community Development Director, and Jeff Bradley of M Group, the city's consultant on the housing element. And then we have a whole group of others on participating remotely, including Luke Evans from ESA, which is the city's environmental consultant, other staff and consultants participating as well. So the purpose of tonight's city council meeting is to consider certification of the subsequent environmental impact report, which we call an SEIR, for the housing element update project and related actions that are required under the California Environmental Quality Act. The SEIR evaluated impacts for the proposed housing, environmental justice, and safety elements. And this evening's meeting will also include council consideration of amending the general plan to update the housing element for the 2023 to 2031 planning period. In order to comply with state law, the housing element must be adopted by today, January 31st, and adoption of the element by that date will allow the city to maintain administration of local zoning, provide access to funding opportunities that will help develop affordable housing and provide for transportation improvements in the community, and allow staff to begin to focus on implementation of the housing element programs. Based on previous council direction, the environmental justice and safety elements will not be adopted this evening or were considered, and work will continue on those elements in the coming months along with zoning implementation for the project. And I have a couple of updates for future actions coming up later in the presentation on those items. So briefly, a little bit of background. Menlo Park's general plan was last updated in 2016, and in early 2021, the city started work on the housing element update project. And we're looking to create opportunities for nearly 3,000 new housing units across the city to meet the regional housing needs allocation that we received from the state, or RHNA. So accounting for above moderate income units already in the city's pipeline, the city needs to plan for 1,477 new affordable units. Another key aspect of the housing element is updating the goals, policies, and programs that will help preserve, improve, and develop housing for all income categories and affirmatively further fair housing throughout the community. City is also updating the required general plan safety element and preparing a new environmental justice element. And as I mentioned, collectively, those are called the housing element update project in total. So this is an extensive background, but it's actually not everything that has happened. This is just some of the highlights, touch points where City Council has reviewed the document. This process has been going on for nearly 2 years now, and there's been a variety of different methods of outreach. We've had project galleries at the libraries. We've had a community survey, pop-up events across town, different focus groups, community meetings, email lists, citywide mailers, and other methods of outreach that we've used to try to interact with the community and get input on the housing element. And as I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list of events and meetings, but some of the highlights for this are just listed here, where City Council reviewed in 2021 and through all of last year, really, leading up to today. And so on January 12th, the most recent item on this list, the Planning and Housing Commissions reviewed and recommended adoption of the housing element at that meeting. There are a few major land use strategies that are being proposed as part of the housing element. And so city is studying the potential for 4,000 new housing units to provide the 1,500, roughly 1,500 units that are required under RHNA. And at past meetings, we've talked about the potential for implementation of the zoning at the same time as adoption of the housing element. As I mentioned earlier, that is not the intent any longer, and based on council direction in December, that is being split off into a separate process. And so that will continue through the coming months as part of a discussion for council. Some of the key roadmap programs around zoning that would be implemented by next year include increasing density bonuses in the affordable housing overlay, which we call the AHO, to allow development of 100% affordable housing at up to 100 dwelling units per acre. Rezoning of commercial sites to allow residential and/or mixed use development on those sites. Removing the minimum lot size to achieve 30 dwelling units per acre for R3 lots that are located around downtown, and allowing sites over 2 acres, a density of 20 dwelling units per acre, and increasing densities in the El Camino Real downtown specific plan area, and removing the residential cap of 680 units. So these are some of the programs. Certainly, these are not locked in. I would say these are things that will be addressed through future discussions on zoning, but these are really sort of the initial roadmap to begin those discussions. Chapter 8 of the housing element also includes a variety of other programs. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. Program H2E, council has discussed this previously, the anti-displacement strategy. So that would be looking at funding for Menlo Park Housing Assistance Program beyond 2024, expansion of just cause eviction policies beyond the current law for tenants of any tenure, increasing the length of time for rent relocation assistance, creating an eviction monitoring and data collection program, and development of a tenant rights education program. Program H4A would be amending the BMR housing regulations to consider increasing the requirements for BMR units depending on the size of a development. Program H4E would look at some streamlined project review for 100% affordable housing in different zoning districts and different types of housing. And then program H4G, which has been discussed quite a bit as well, would prioritize city-owned land. And by that, we're really referring to the downtown parking lots that are included in the housing element for affordable housing. So there are many, many other programs that are outlined in the final review draft housing element, the red line that was included in the staff report as an attachment. This is a map of our opportunity sites that are listed in the housing element. Part of affirmatively furthering fair housing is to consider distribution of the housing throughout the community. And so we've looked at the different districts and opportunities that exist there. And so there's the idea of spreading the development throughout the community. But then on top of that, we also are taking into consideration some of HCD's requirements about the size of a parcel that makes sense for development of affordable housing, incorporating that as well. And so there are several layers here that have led to these particular sites being listed, these 69 sites listed in the housing element. And so now I will turn the presentation over to Luke Evans of ESA, our environmental consultant. And Luke, you can just go ahead and let me know when you want me to advance these slides for you.
Sounds good, Tom. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. Glad to be here. We've been working on this for about 2 years as part of the M Group team and really appreciate the opportunity. Happy to be rounding the bend and seeing the finish line in sight. I'm going to real quickly just go over some of the findings in the EIR and the basic process, and I won't belabor the point because I know that many of you all are quite familiar with this because we've talked before, but let's give it a go. Go ahead, Tom. So we made the decision early to go ahead and tier off of the Connect Menlo EIR from 2016 on this because it was kind of made sense. It was kind of a subsequent action of that effort, which was in itself a general plan update, as this would be. So we went ahead and prepared a subsequent EIR, and it's for all the elements associated that Tom's already listed: housing, safety, environmental justice, and so we're just looking at addressing some of the impacts of providing expanded housing opportunities in areas that are beyond the Bayfront, which is what Connect Menlo primarily focused on. Next slide, Tom. So here's our list. Tom had a list. Here's mine. We've been through quite a few. We've been through quite a bit over the last year and a half, 2 years. And here we are at the final certification hearing, January 31st, 11th hour, not quite the 11th day, maybe not quite the 11th hour. We'll see if we get there. But here we are, and this is the process. And we've been through all of the usual CEQA requirements as far as publishing a notice of preparation, scoping sessions, publishing the draft EIR, accepting comments on those, responding to those comments. And now here we are at the final certification hearing. Go ahead, Tom. So these are all the issues that were assessed in the EIR. These are pretty much the standard list. There are a couple that are missing. For instance, there are no agricultural resources in the city, and there really aren't any mineral resources in the city that would be affected by the project. So we did not analyze those, but these are what we looked at, and that is part of the draft EIR and what will eventually be the final EIR once it's certified. Next slide, Tom. So here's a quick overview of the principal findings of the EIR. For the most part, I don't know what percentage of issues and impacts were found to be less than significant, but certainly the vast majority, probably 90%. But we did come up with four or five different impacts that we determined would be significant and unavoidable. These are very conservative findings based on kind of a worst case scenario. And when we weren't sure, we just went ahead and found for significant and unavoidable. For instance, on air quality, we found that emissions during construction of larger projects could be construction emissions, vehicles and heavy equipment, things like that. Construction emissions could be significant and unavoidable, particularly for larger projects. In many cases, those impacts can be mitigated, but in some cases, perhaps they wouldn't be able to. So we went ahead and found significant and unavoidable for that one. Cultural resources is similar. There are no plans to demolish National Register eligible sites or buildings in the city as part of the housing element update, but we couldn't guarantee that at some point in the future, a compelling proposal might be presented where that scenario could actually be a possibility. So on the basis of that, we found conservatively that the impact could be significant and unavoidable. For transportation, we found the same impact, significant unavoidable impact for the housing element update as was found for Connect Menlo in 2016, in that required upgrades to pedestrian and bicycle facilities might not occur because there may not be an established nexus and there therefore may not be identified funding. Again, conservative finding. I think in many cases there will be mitigations and there would be ways to fund those types of projects, and therefore those significant impacts would not be realized. But conservatively, we went ahead and said that it's possible. Transportation, and yet another transportation significant unavoidable impact. We found that some of the sites, especially the more further afield sites, opportunity areas, could result in vehicle miles traveled that exceed the regional average or do not meet the established criteria for VMT. Most will, since most of the proposed development is in the downtown area near high quality transit, et cetera. Most of those would be fine. They would not result in a significant impact. But once again, just to be conservative, we went ahead and found significant and unavoidable for VMT, particularly for those sites that are a little further afield that aren't necessarily adjacent to high quality transit. Next slide, please, Tom. We looked at two alternatives. No project alternative is exactly what it sounds like. It's required by CEQA. Basically, what would happen if we didn't do anything, if we just went ahead and continued with the city's existing housing element, which was adopted in 2015, and did not change anything, did not do anything. Of course, there's lots of problems associated with that, which I won't elaborate on. You all know what those are. But nevertheless, this is a requirement of CEQA, so we went ahead and looked at that. We also looked at another alternative which addressed one of the significant and unavoidable effects that we talked about. And CEQA alternatives are generally intended to be targeted toward dealing with or managing impacts that have been identified to be significant. And as was discussed in the last slide, VMT is potentially significant for the housing element as proposed. And so we looked at what we called a low VMT area alternative. In other words, it was essentially putting all of the housing element update sites and opportunity sites and housing strategy locations within a defined low VMT alternative area, which we kind of already know what that area is. It's downtown. We have lots of data to support those areas that that demonstrate low VMT, particularly along the El Camino Real corridor, near the Caltrain station, et cetera. So we looked at that alternative, and that was identified as the environmentally superior alternative. Next slide, please, Tom. So I'm going to quickly go over what some of the comments were, and which comments we did receive. So here's a quick list of who we heard from. We heard from SFPUC, particularly related to potential impacts to their facilities, i.e. the Hetch Hetchy Aqueduct. Ravenswood Community School District requested that one of their properties be included with the housing element as part of a housing element opportunity site. We then heard from 10 organizations and 11 individuals. So the final SEIR that is before you tonight and is presented for certification is a number of things. It's first of all, it includes the draft SEIR that was circulated a couple months ago, 3 months ago. It includes a response to comments on the comments that were received on the draft SEIR. It also includes a section related to revisions that were made to the draft SEIR based on public comment or staff changes to fix things that, minor errors that may have been identified in the review. And then it also includes the Mitigation Monitoring and Reporting Program, otherwise known as the MMRP. And together, each of these 4 components constitutes the supplement or subsequent EIR. Next slide, please. So here's the principal comments you received. There's a number of comments that were related to issues that are specific to CEQA, that are germane to CEQA, and quite a few that were not, that were more opinions or folks' perspective on how they thought the HEU should be implemented, and those are non-CEQA issues. The CEQA issues we heard the most about were aesthetic impacts of densification, bigger buildings, greater massing, et cetera, as would be expected. Impacts to biological resources were highlighted in a number of comment letters, specifically those related to impacts related to birds and trees. There was questions about the population and growth methodologies that were used in the SEIR. Questions about impact or comments about impact to recreation facilities, specifically park facilities. Questions about vehicle miles traveled, and then also questions about water supply. Some of the non-CEQA issues that we heard about were requests to add sites. Some folks wanted sites added, and then the second bullet point here is some folks wanted sites removed. The draft EIR analyzed the HEU as proposed. It did not really go into, it's not really appropriate to talk about adding and removing sites. We analyzed what was presented to us, and that follows the protocols of CEQA. We had some requests for higher densities and more affordability. And then we also had concerns raised about traffic congestion and parking, which, as many of you know, those 2 topics are no longer CEQA issues. VMT is generally the primary criteria for analyzing transportation impacts in CEQA now, and has been for several years. Okay, last and final, I think this final slide, Tom. Yep. Okay, here we are. So what's next? You know what's on the docket tonight. Certification of the final EIR, and that would involve the council verifying that the final SEIR meets the requirements of CEQA. And then you would concur with the CEQA findings, and you would adopt a statement of overriding consideration for those items that I talked about a few minutes ago. And then you would also adopt the MMRP. So that's the end of my presentation, right, Tom? I think that's the last slide. So I will go on mute now.
Thank you, Luke. I'll continue with the staff presentation. We have noted that there are some proposed changes to the housing element and the draft resolutions that we've noticed either as staff or from individual council members. We've heard requests for some modifications. And so bear with me, I'm going to switch screens here quickly and pull up that list. And I, prior to public comment, would like to walk through those items and then can certainly revisit those in more detail for council discussion. Give me just one moment. Okay, so I have 5 tabs here. I will not read in detail every single word here, but we'll just give a brief overview. And then if we want to revisit later on, certainly we would entertain council's request to discuss each of these items more in depth. So the first category is items related to the CEQA resolution. There are a couple things here that we noted. We need to incorporate the January 6th, 2023 water supply assessment approval letter from Cal Water. So we intend to do that. And then there was a request to revise some text within the resolution related to the term village character, which was referenced at the time that the specific plan was adopted in 2012. And so making that note here, and then noting that the low VMT area alternative would not meet the project objectives to distribute housing throughout the different districts. So those are the 2 changes that we noted for that resolution. Planning Commission recommended some modifications that I'll briefly go through here. So for the anti-displacement strategy, they were interested in initiating this project earlier, and they wanted multiple items to occur concurrently beginning in actually this year. And then another item was to modify the affordable housing overlay. And they wanted, it noted that the AHO could provide for 100 units per acre or greater densities. So that's noted. And the changes here are anything that's underlined is a proposed change. Strike through means delete text. So the next item would be the program H4G, considering city-owned land for housing downtown parking lots. They wanted that modified so that that program would look at issuance of an RFP, rezoning of the parcels, and a feasibility study in 2023, and then moving forward the development timeline for various other aspects of that project. Program H4M, updating the parking requirements and design standards. And they wanted that specified that any in lieu fees collected and alternative transportation in lieu fee would be used towards modes of transportation other than personal motor vehicles. Program H6F, noting that TDM should apply to all projects regardless of whether or not they're located close to transit. And then finally, a new program was suggested, which would be program H5H, tenant readiness education program to help renters sort of learn about different topics such as finding affordable housing, understanding the rental process, learning about fair housing regulations, and identifying financial or other assistance. The Housing Commission had 3 recommendations. Program H4D, they wanted to add an evaluation of processing fee waivers, deferrals, or other reductions of fees for affordable housing development on sites where the affordable housing overlay would be applicable. A new program, H5G, would be a racial equity training program. So that'd be partnering with an organization. The Government Alliance on Race and Equity was mentioned as an example. And then finally, program H4G, the downtown parking lots, affordable housing development. They had a slightly different requested modification than the Planning Commission. And they suggested that a feasibility study be initiated in 2023. And then from there, looking at phasing in the dates a little bit earlier for other remaining steps of that program.
Excuse me, Mr. Smith, just for folks following along, can you confirm that the tab we're looking at now and the previous tab that says Planning Commission are the same as the information provided in the staff report, or have any changes been made?
You're correct. These are directly from the staff report.
Okay, thank you. So for those following along, the first tab was information that's first being shown here live in the meeting about the EIR addition or change. The Planning Commission tab that we just saw in the Housing Commission tab, that is information that was previously shared in the staff report. And as we move on to the final two tabs, I believe that's also fresh information that council members haven't even seen what each other have thought. So I just wanted to provide that clarity. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. It's a great distinction. So I'll move towards some what we're calling non-substantive changes. These are minor typographical errors. I'll just give an example here. So for instance, like the word "to" was missed on page 5-11. And so these are things that are not going to affect the programs or implementation of the document, but really cleaning up some items that were missed. And then finally, we have some individual council members suggested some more substantive modifications to the housing element. And so this is being shared for the first time with the council. There is one item at the top that staff identified, site number 64, which is the Veterans Affairs Hospital. That project development package has come in, and it looks like it's actually going to be 60 units of affordable housing. A couple of the units are for a manager, for staff, and so we wanted to make that note. On page 4-29, we were pointed to an error. There is a mention of a Menlo Park Union School District, which does not exist, and so we would remove that text. And additionally, a related change about a footnote related to the one that I just mentioned, and then a mention of a school accountability report card for an institution that does not exist. The next one would be in the appendix. We were asked to update because of redistricting in April of 2022. Some of those figures and mentions of the council districts are now a little bit outdated, so we would do a comprehensive change of that information in the document. On page 7-24, we would update some text. So this is regarding, I believe that this said that all of the sites were in high-performing school districts, except for a couple. We've noted that there are more than just a couple that are outside. And so changing it to the majority, the vast majority are, but I think there may be 6 or 7 that are not. The next one would be revising text related to open space. So there are a couple of mentions of on page 7-16 in the site inventory and analysis, clarifying that the city council decided not to pursue housing development in parks or the civic center site, and giving a reason for that being the importance of green space and community open access for all residents. There was also a related clarification on page 8-36, noting the expansion of beneficial uses such as green and open spaces, not just open space, but green space as well for new development. And then finally would be on page 8-26, there was a former title of one of these programs. It was Consider City-Owned Land for Housing Downtown Parking Lots. The proposed title would be Prioritize Affordable Housing on City-Owned Parking Lots Downtown. So making that clarification, and I think that kind of dovetails with one of the Planning Commission recommendations as well. So those are the items that we had noted. Now I will return back to the presentation. I promise there's just a couple slides left. So we wanted to let you know of a couple upcoming milestones. On February 9th at 6 p.m., there is going to be an Environmental Justice and Safety Elements community meeting. This meeting will be in English, and it will be held at the Belhaven Branch Library. And then the next evening on February 10th at 6 p.m., there will be an Environmental Justice and Safety Elements community meeting in Spanish, and that will also be at the Belhaven Branch Library. And then looking ahead, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, in the coming months, we are going to continue advancing environmental justice and safety elements. The community meetings certainly lead into that and will contribute towards that work. And then the zoning implementation piece, which we are saying in the housing element that we'll do within a year. We'll be also working on those items. And then finally, I wanted to give an update of sort of what's the next step for the housing element itself. So following the meeting this evening, we will finalize that document and then resubmit it to the California Department of Housing and Community Development. And typically, I think we're seeing about a 60-day review period. And so we would intend to submit that shortly after this meeting, once we can make all of the cleanups and confirm everything, ship that over to them, and then we would certainly keep council updated on our response from HCD on that document. And for the general public, anyone who's listening, we're going to continue to provide updates on the various elements of the Housing Element Update project on the city's webpage. And so would invite you to certainly continue to stay tuned and listen in. Check that website, menlopark.gov/housing element. And with that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for that informative presentation. And just before we get on to public comment, I just want to thank staff and our consultants, really everyone who worked so hard to put this together. So unless there are any clarifying kind of technical questions about what you just heard from Mr. Smith, we'll move on to the public hearing. So I'm not seeing any questions. So I would like to open the public hearing. Deputy Clerk Sandoval, please call for public comments on this item. And then depending on the number of public speakers, we may be limiting comment time to 2 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Willison. At this time, any member of the public wishing to comment on item C1, consider the Planning Commission's recommendation to adopt a resolution to certify the subsequent environmental impact report, adopt California Environmental Quality Act findings, adopt a statement of overriding considerations for significant and unavoidable impacts for the housing element update project, and approve a mitigation and monitoring program. And 2, the Planning Commission and Housing Commission's recommendations to adopt a resolution to amend the general plan to update the housing element for the 2023 to 2031 planning period. Please use that raised hand feature at the bottom of your screen. Press *9 on your landline or cell phone, or fill out a speaker card and return it to the clerk's desk. Mayor Willison, right now I have 5 public commenters.
So
6.
at this time, we would like to ask everyone to raise their hand if you're planning on making a public comment, so we can make an assessment on how many speakers we have.
Holding steady at 6, Mayor Willison.
Okay, we can go ahead with our typical 3 minutes for now. Thanks.
Okay. Great. And our first public commenter is going to be Nestor Flores.
Hello, good evening, Council. My name is Nestor Flores, and I'm a local union from 9144. I would like to speak a little bit prior to me joining the union. I grew up in East Palo Alto, and growing up, it was difficult for me to find work. So I seen a lot of friends joining the union, and I seen how their life was changing. Providing for their family. So, I asked them what you guys did, to join the union. So they went to job train in Menlo Park. So I said, let me give it a try. And they gave me the fundamental the skills of how to build and how to, build stuff. So I liked it. And ever since then, I think I joined job train 2013, I think. And then I got into the union in 2015. So ever since then, I've been working nonstop. I'm thankful. And, now I would like to give back to the community, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next commenter is going to be Isabel Pardo.
Good evening, council. My name is Isabel Pardo, and it's cool to hear about all these projects that are coming. And the only thing that makes me think about this more so than anything is thinking as of last year. Last year, I got tax season is coming, and I have 5 different W-2 forms from places that I was working at. I was working double jobs, I was working long hours, and I was traveling to many places around the areas, and all to say that I had to have multiple jobs just to keep living here. On the second part is I had no healthcare, and on top of it all, like if there was an accident at work, it was mostly coming out of my pocket, and glad to pay, but it was quite an expensive bill. As of this year and part of last year, still towards the end after joining the union, I only have one W-4 tax form that's coming from them, and I am so excited for that. I've been working nonstop. I've been able to support myself, a little bit of my family now, and I'm glad to say that I'm spending a lot of that money here. And I also went to job train, had a great time learning there, and now I'm able to give that right back. So if any consideration is to be given, it is for sure that union workers can definitely spend their money here. We get healthcare, and on top of it all, it's like we get to stay in one place and work at one place only. And with that, thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next public commenter will be Brian Shields.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. My name is Brian Shields. I'm a field representative for Carpenters Local 217, located in San Mateo County, domiciled in Foster City. We come here tonight to talk about the housing element, though I know that it is maybe not the 11th hour, but it is 10:59 for sure. So I realize that any kind of change to it might incur another week's worth of public comment period. And so I'm not here to maybe ask for a change, but what I'm here to do is to say that, is it 1,500 units? Now that's 1,500 units of housing that is an opportunity for a family, a person to live here in Menlo Park, right? Now, there's a giant missed opportunity for the people that are actually building it. A lot of times the workforce that we find is just completely exploited. I heard them talk about the VTA, right? Your vehicle travel, miles traveled, is a VMT. And the guys that I'm running into and the projects that I'm walking that are here in Menlo Park, the guys are coming from Modesto, they're coming from Salinas, they're coming from all over the place. How close it is to a train isn't going to make a difference because they can't afford to live anywhere where a train has access. So Redwood City decided to bring forward encouragement language. Now, I realize that encouragement language doesn't have a lot of teeth, right? But it's a building block. It's an intention. It's a movement. And what that movement would do, right? I'm also not a person that's just going to say that we need to build union because I belong to a union and I'm a representative in union, right? I believe that union fills a niche. It fills the niche where the pressure of the dollar doesn't affect the worker as much because they have representation, right? They're able to make a livable wage. They're able to get healthcare. They're able to get apprenticeship. They're able to also, cities are allowed to, able to adopt a local hire part of it as well, right? 25% local hire. That would mean people from Menlo Park or from the neighboring communities, San Mateo County would be able to fill those jobs. I really appreciate your time. I don't think I'm going to get my next thought out in 25 seconds. And have a great night.
Thank you for your comment. Our next public comment will be coming from Lynn Bramlett. Lynn, you should be able to unmute and speak.
Good evening, everyone. This is Lynn Bramlett, a resident in District 3. I happen to be in Vancouver, Canada right now, and I might have an unstable internet connection. First, I appreciated the comments from the gentleman before me. I'm sure the staff is very tired. I'm sure the council is very tired. But I think what is needed in this coming year is an informal evaluation of the city's planning process in kind of a non-threatening way. I'm talking about an informal collect input. How can we make it more of a collaborative planning model where we aren't at the 11th hour? We actually are at the 11th hour, as I understand it. You have to make a decision. It was difficult to read some of the screen. And some of the decisions that were made, I don't recall ever being discussed, such as the decision not to also update the noise element and the open space and conservation. And initially, there was a plan to include a very draft safety element and environmental justice for approval with the idea of getting feedback later. So I think something isn't at all right with this picture, and it would benefit from, again, in the spirit of what can be better, kind of a teamwork. I'm not talking about fault finding or any of that, but let's examine this planning process, including the continued tearing off Connect Menlo. I've read the program EIR thoroughly, and I consider it a weak foundation for today. It needs to be examined in light of new information and what wasn't included when it was studied. I will be submitting detailed input into the safety and the environmental justice, and joining whatever public efforts there are, and also offering to host some. I think both need considerable work. And I also think the noise and open space and conservation decision should be revisited. Noise is very much a concern with District 1 residents based on what I read in the summaries from the focus groups and the surveys. I would say it's an issue in the other parts of Menlo Park, and will be more so, especially with the housing being built. For example, my husband and I were at a restaurant not that long before I left town, where the noise was so loud we couldn't even hear each other, and the decibel volume, because one of our friends had a meter on his phone, was between 85 and 90 decibels. And as I understand it, anything over 70 decibels damages hearing, and damaged hearing is also linked to dementia. So we're gonna need, again, this is the 11th hour. I realize you pretty much have to pass this. I don't object, but I'm making some comments related to the big picture for planning. I think it needs a serious reexamination. And thank you, Council.
Thank you for your comments. Our next public commenter will be Jenny Michelle.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, staff, neighbors, members of the public. My name is Jenny Michelle from the Coleman Place Neighborhood Block, longtime renting resident on Willow Road next to the VA, parent of IEP student at Laurel, a recovering homeless teacher, and by trade a commercial property manager. Item C1, on the water use concerns per Sustainable San Mateo, 56% of our water use is consumed by single family residents, and only 12% on multifamily. Of the single family, 50% is being used directly for landscaping. So I didn't hear him talk about that. Personal comments. We need stronger policies to support our claims made in the housing element. Our housing element still does not have robust policies to promote actual production of low-income units. We need to provide clear timelines for implementation of 1, tenant protections, and 2, development of city-owned parking lots. Then I recommend removing the sites from the inventory list in which owners have no direct interest in developing for housing, such as the Sandhill Collection in District 5. Also instruct staff to bring the housing element back before City Council as soon as possible if the state declines to certify the second submittal. pursue substantially stronger policies to promote housing, including rezoning base density on opportunity sites to 115 dwelling units per acre at a minimum. We need a streamlining provision for affordable housing production to help the development timeline to break ground. We've made a commitment to building, but now we need to focus on time because time is money. We have spent time on funding, but we need to address this process aspect. Keep in mind that affordable projects usually have a nonprofit layer cake they have to bake in order, and they can lose their funding if you drag out the process. Make it electronic and cut down on the timing so we don't lose out. Further, I'd argue that our RHNA numbers are actually too low. We could simply be responsible for our demand or load that we carry by considering just our high school and college graduates. In 2022, there were 533 MA graduates. Not all of them are leaving the area for college, so I'd say we need to house half. And many of those are low-income residents working in service. Multiply that out by 30 and 40 years, you can just see how clearly our numbers are low. And lastly, I'd like to share that a nurse friend of the family committed suicide last week because of housing instability. We have to rip the Band-Aid off and get to work to meet our needs. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next public commenter will be Kathleen Daly.
Hello, good evening, Mayor Wilson, Vice Mayor Taylor, and representatives of the City Council. As a small business owner here in Menlo Park, I think it's important to kind of understand what it sounds like when people are discouraged or don't want affordable housing. Affordable housing means your favorite clerk at Trader Joe's or Draeger's. It means your favorite barista at Pete's or Baroni's. It means that favorite person that bags your stuff helps you at Costco. There is a whole wealth of people that help make the Bay Area and certainly Menlo Park a great place to be. And when you talk about affordable housing, it's all of us. It's our library clerks. It's our, probably in many ways, some of the people that work for the city or work for the county, public works, the union guys that just spoke up a few minutes ago. They're all great neighbors. They're all great people, teachers, veterinary assistants, medical assistants, people that take your x-rays, people that, draw your blood. These are all people that if they had an opportunity and a choice to live just a little bit closer, maybe they don't drive in from Tracy, maybe they don't have to cross the bridge, maybe they can walk to work and serve you dinner at night, not you, but everybody in this town or this county. They make this a great place to live. It's not just the weather. It's not just where we are in the country, politically or otherwise. It's some really cool things can happen when you keep and create community. And affordable housing should include that element. It really should be a lot about what makes a place great, not just whether or not you can make over $200,000, $300,000 a year and afford to live here and keep your beautiful home and your tree-lined streets. What makes a great place to live is everything about it. And I'm just asking you, I know that some of you are about housing, and I just want to say thank you for that and support you moving a housing element forward that includes affordable housing for everyone. And it's not just people that you think you don't want as your neighbor. It's all of us. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next public commenter will be Pam Jones.
Pam Jones, Menlo Park resident and in the Bellhaven neighborhood. Honorable Mayor Wolfson, Vice Mayor Taylor, Council Members Combe, Nash, and Dorr, and staff. I first want to thank you for the translation service this evening. It's important to always practice language justice, especially with things of this depth. The staff is to be commended for the short turnaround for the incorporation of the Planning and Housing Commission's recommendation on the final housing element. So thank you for that. This cycle is very different than the two previous housing elements. I can only imagine the challenges. With all of that being said, a thorough, inclusive, and equitable housing element should include the policies and programs compatible with the 7 subject areas outlined in that letter from the climate resilient communities. The community of Bellhaven has provided significant information throughout the environmental justice element process, and this information cannot be excluded. My concern is that we will have a great environmental justice element without any policies and programs that will be implemented or guide us forward. This inclusion of these recommendations will demonstrate the city's ability to recognize and apply environmental justice element as a component of the affirmatively furthering fair housing requirement. This would also demonstrate that even though 50 housing element outreach surveys from Bellhaven were inadvertently misplaced, the city does, in fact, and incorporates the voice of all of its residents. We recognize that we're down to the hour here on our submission with the deadline. I assume it's tonight at midnight. So at a minimum, a strong statement indicating our intention to revise the housing element to include the environmental justice element, subject areas with the policies and programs should be included. And then we give ourselves a 60-day period to send a submission to the HCD. And hopefully it would be there in time before they send their required revisions, because certainly we don't get it perfect even the second time. Again, thank you, and I appreciate the work you're doing, and I look forward to the housing element and the with the environmental justice element being implemented within the city.
Thank you for your comment. So our final public commenter will be Brittany Baxter, and this is our final call for public comment on item C1.
First, thank you so much to staff and consultants and commissioners and council. I've been following along with this process for the last almost 2 years, and I know there's been hundreds of hours of thoughtful work that went into creating this plan. So thank you for that. I just wanted to quickly voice my support for the housing elements plans overall and talk about why I'm so excited for the future with more homes and more anti-displacement protections and just growth, really to echo a lot of the earlier comments. So I think all of those items together give us more options and increases our community's self-sufficiency and our resiliency in really important ways. And I think we all benefit from that, whether we own or rent or work or go to school here, just across the board. So of course, the most obvious benefit of the housing element is that new homes give people more options for where to live. And those are opportunities to stay in the community, even as your financial situation changes, your living situation changes, maybe your family changes, maybe you end a relationship or have a new job or anything across the board. Just gives us more shots on goal for being able to keep people in the community, our existing friends and neighbors. And I think that's really important for resiliency. And specifically to echo some of the earlier comments, I really think it's important that these homes give workers additional options to remain in our community too. I'm so excited for the new amenities that are opening up recently and that will open up later this year. And I also know from personal conversations with a lot of stressed out small business owners how hard it is to hire in the area. Definitely a lot of workers are telling business owners that they either have to commute in from really far away, or if they want to live a little closer to work, they're really crammed into an overcrowded living situation. And a lot of people finally look at that and get fed up and they decide, that's it, I'm going to go live somewhere else where, my work and my job are not so stressful. And so when I think about what that means for our community at scale, I think that does explain why we're seeing a lot of places being short-staffed and a lot of help to wanted signs everywhere. And again, it impacts all of us in the community. So I'm really grateful to hear, that we are planning for more homes. I think that keeps it easier for everybody who keeps our community running day to day to live here. And I think it's really important to grow equitably across the economic spectrum. That gives us a lot of self-sufficiency and makes us stronger as we grow. And I've also finally just been really excited to hear a lot of thoughtful planning kind of across the general plan process. So one thing I was really interested to see recently is Arlington, Virginia released some data that even though they've grown their population in recent decades, they've put a big emphasis on walkable communities and transit first planning. And they found that through planning like that, even though they're adding more residents, because they're being really thoughtful about it, their traffic is actually down to 1980s levels, despite adding like thousands more people to their communities. So I thought that's really huge. I thought that's a really promising direction for what we could expect to see here as well. Walkable neighborhood level amenities. I'm super excited to be able to walk to a few things from my house as well as a lot of these new amenities come online. And I'll just keep it brief there, but thank you again so much for all of your work to help us build this great, resilient, climate-friendly future for our community.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, Mayor Willison, that is all I have for cards and hands. Please proceed with the next part of the meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Sandoval. And thank you to all of the public commenters who spoke tonight, both here in council chambers and remotely. And with that, I'm actually going to officially close the public hearing, which now opens the conversation up to the council. And before we start talking amongst ourselves, I just want to give council a plan for how to walk through the rest of this evening's conversation. So we have a couple tasks before us tonight. One is to certify the environmental impact report. So we're going to start with that. So we will have conversations around the environmental impact report. Then we will move on to the recommendations from the Housing and the Planning Commission that Mr. Smith showed us on, I believe those were tabs 2 and 3, also found in our staff reports. Then we'll move on to the pre-submitted city council feedback that Mr. Smith showed us, some of those minor wordsmith changes, and get consensus around those and around other changes that or alterations that were brought up by council members. And then we'll have an opportunity if there's other issues related to the housing element that we want to discuss or edit or bring up, knowing that we turn into pumpkins at some point tonight. But first of all, does everyone understand or have any questions about the process to go through this evening? Yes, Councilmember Combs?
So we're going to take the EIR up first,
Correct.
but like if you have substantive concerns about the housing element, like why would you vote for the EIR, which underlies the housing element? It seems like any substantive issues you have about the housing element, you wouldn't vote for the EIR, or you would have them addressed before you get to the EIR. Or please let me know if I'm missing something.
If I may, Mayor Willison, members of the council, I'm Mary Wagner. I'm part of your city attorney's office. And CEQA requires that you take action on the environmental document before you take action on the project. So that's why we've established these actions in the order in which they're presented.
But the environmental, the EIR talks about impacts of the project, right?
Correct.
So if I have issues with a project, why would I talk about the issues related to the impacts of the project before I talk about the project? If I have issues with the project, it seems like I want to discuss those issues with the project first before I get to the impacts.
I think it's fine to do it in the order you're suggesting also, and you all might have a discussion about that, but I understand the request is you'd like to talk about both before you vote on either, and that makes good sense.
Well, I'm just saying that like if I have issues with the project, then and we discuss the EIR, then I'm going to vote against the EIR. because I haven't gone to discuss the project and have my issues about the project discussed. So we can follow whatever course you want to, but if I don't feel that like I get to address the substantive issues I have about the project, then I'm just, then I don't see how I can vote for the EIR.
Can I ask a clarifying question? The EIR, our certification of the EIR is our acknowledgement and acceptance of that what we scoped to be studied was properly studied and that the impacts are to our satisfaction identified and when possible mitigated. So it's possible that the EIR there are things that I'd be interested in that, you know, weren't studied, let's say with zoning, which we're going to get into. But that doesn't negate the EIR in and of itself and our ability to certify what was studied. I feel like I'm talking in a riddle.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Councilmember Combs, do you have a recommendation on how you would like to go about this conversation?
Well, so what are we going to discuss if we're going your route, what are we going to discuss in the EIR? Like what? Give me some sense of the framing of that discussion, like what we're going to discuss. And then when we get to the project, give me some sense of the framing of the project discussion. And then I can respond, because at this point, I don't know exactly. We're just saying we're going to talk about the EIR and then we're going to talk about the project. And in my sense, it would be reversed. But you know, if we want to do the EIR first, then I just have to know like how you're framing it. But again, like I go back to the issues. If I don't feel that like concerns I have about the project are being addressed when we get to the vote of the EIR, then I don't see how I can vote for the EIR.
I see Mr. Schaefer's hand raised. Is there something you'd like to add to this conversation, Mr. Schaefer?
Yes, if I may. The reason for splitting the two is that the EIR, even if you are against the housing element, and this usually happens when there are development projects involved, you may want to tweak the project or deny the project, but the first question is whether the EIR adequately studied environmental effects of the project as described, which would be the housing element. And after certifying the EIR as adequately covering the project as described, you then would go on to discuss the actual project and either deny it or tweak it. And in that process, you would then decide, okay, if we tweak it, then does the tweaked project is it still covered by the EIR, so you can approve the project relying on the EIR? That's why it's a two-step process. I've often seen EIRs certified, then the project denied or sent back for a reevaluation. But that way the EIR, once certified, once you say it covers this particular project, it then is certified and is established and can be used as the basis for considering whatever you may consider. That may be this housing element. It may be an amendment to the housing element 3 months from now when you want to maybe do something like increase density in one area. It then provides that foundation, similar to the Connect Menlo EIR having been used over the intervening years as the basis for other approvals.
So can I follow up with a question? We're engaged in this process as a part of a obligation from the state. So what is the state looking for? Like if we approve the EIR and not the project, would we be considered in compliance? Or if we approve the project and not the EIR, would the state be happy? No, I think we're only like going to meet their obligations if we approve both. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But the state is looking for both of these approval, and both of these approvals are necessary for us to meet the obligations as required by the housing element. If I'm wrong, someone can please correct me. So that's why I think the comment about this in connection of a project, then yes, I can see if there's a project or a situation where the discretion is on the city council or whatever governing body, then yeah, you can look at it as like the EIR and the project are separate. But if we are, as part of this process, meeting obligations we have to the state, And that obligation is required by both of these things being approved. Again, I don't know if I'm sort of aligned with the reasoning behind, or at least, again, it just doesn't seem like it's valid because, like, again, if we're achieving what we want to achieve and meeting our obligations to the state, both have to be approved.
I see a hand raised from Vice Mayor Taylor. Vice Mayor Taylor?
Thank you, Mayor Willison, and thank you, Councilmember Combs, for bringing up those concerns. I have some questions actually going back to one of the slides. So, Mayor Willison, I don't know if you are fixed on the process or the approach that you wanted to take as far as how we proceed, but I had some clarifying questions, if that's possible to do now.
Yeah, that's absolutely possible. And maybe given this discussion, what we can do is each council member, if they want, can speak what's on their mind. And then as long as we get through the things that I outlined at some point, we'll be in good shape. So Vice Mayor Taylor, do you want to start it off, and then we can, Councilmember Combs, if you want to go back to you after Vice Mayor Taylor. So Vice Mayor Taylor, you have the floor.
Thank you. And this is the principal findings of the draft EIR. And that is the less than significant effects. And I guess this goes to the overriding circumstances. So one is air quality, the second is cultural resources, the third is transportation, the fourth is transportation. So I just wanted to ask a few questions. One is, are the mitigating measures using current CEQA or current Bay Area Air Quality Management District guidelines for the MMRP, or are we using the 2016 Connect Menlo mitigation measures? And this question came up when we were discussing Willow Village as well for me. And I do not remember the answer, which is why I'm asking again.
Mayor, if I may, I would ask Mr. Evans from ESA to help address that question.
Thank you.
Hi there, I hope you can see me. The answer to your question, Vice Mayor, is we are using the most current guidelines. That's required. You can't go back and you can't continue to use guidelines that have been revised. We are required to use the latest and greatest, and that's what the EIR looked at and analyzed.
From my understanding, since we're tearing off Connect Menlo, is that we would use the mitigation measures from that year, which would be 2016, which is why I'm asking. So you're saying we're using the current ones, which is
if I may, yes, the mitigation measures that were prescribed in 2016 would still apply, but we also added additional mitigation measures on top of that to, among other things, comply with the latest guidance from BACMed.
Thank you. My next question is with the cultural resources, just thinking about what you said could not be mitigated. Can you just go over that one more time, please?
Yeah, I know that's confusing, and this we've gotten this on all of these projects we've been working on. The reason we found that was there's only so much we can know currently, and well, there's really two issues. First is that, and then second is what is or is not a significant resource is a bit of a moving target. As things get older, they may become eligible. So what's not eligible today, for instance, could be eligible in 5 years, for instance. Typically, the rule of thumb is buildings that are 45 or 50 years of age, depending on which criteria you use, are potentially eligible and should be looked at and should be assessed as part of any kind of environmental review. So naturally, a building that is 39 years or 44 years old today, next year will be 45 years old and would therefore be kicked into a review process. So there's that. So you kind of have this moving target that you have to address when it comes to analyzing buildings. And the other issue is that naturally, we did not go to every one of these housing opportunity sites or evaluate the entire city, all the buildings in the city, to determine which could be potentially eligible. We left that for later because we don't know what kind of proposals are down the road. We don't know what would be proposed on any of those sites. So when the time comes for those sites to be developed and when an application is submitted, that would trigger a review of are there buildings that are age eligible? And two, are there buildings that are in fact eligible? And that would be determined by an architectural historian that meets specific criteria and standards for ability to analyze those resources. So the upshot is that we just don't know. And it's possible, it's entirely possible that somebody may present a compelling proposal at some point for development of a project, a housing project, and that may involve the demolition of a historic building. It's possible that could happen. It happens all the time. But we don't know for sure, so we just erred on the side of caution and said significant, non-avoidable. I would add that there are no plans currently to demolish any historic buildings in the city as part of this, but it's possible it could occur. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you. My next question is about the transportation required upgrades to pedestrian and bicycle facilities. Were the city's transportation master plan, the list of items on there considered when this was studied? So the list of items that the city already has for transportation improvements for pedestrian and bicycle.
The answer to the question is yes, they were. But once again, it's possible that projects may be proposed that could result in impacts to bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and there may not, and those needed impact or improvements may not be on the list currently. Once again, that's kind of a moving target too, because that list gets updated periodically. So once again, we found, just to be on the safe side, that it's possible that a project might get proposed that for which there is not a direct nexus identified to require funding.
Thank you.
Sure.
And Mayor Wilson, I don't have any additional questions at this moment about the overriding circumstance.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor Taylor. And Vice Mayor Taylor, since we're on you, are there any other EIR related concerns or questions or edits that you're going to want to see prior to making a decision on certification, or conversations you want to have, or do you want to be able to, for us to come back to you?
Please come back to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councilmember Combs.
Okay, I think I will consolidate all of my questions holistically into this moment. So you can hold me to that, right? First, I want to say I do want to thank staff and consultants for all of the multi-year work on this. As I've said before, reading the reports give me a headache, and so I can only imagine what it took to actually write them and understand them. And so I do want to extend my appreciation for what I know is hours upon hours of work in producing this housing element. I did have a question. What does the housing element say about union labor, if it says anything?
So the current version does not have goals or policies or information related to that topic.
So can it say something? Does that throw off the EIR in some substantive way?
I don't think that would affect the environmental review because it wouldn't have a physical impact on the environment to add in language encouraging union labor.
So does it throw off anything, the EIR, the project, if we add some language, some language encouraging the use of union labor?
I don't believe it would, although I would look to Assistant City Attorney Wagner if there's anything she would add to that.
Thank you. I don't believe that it would throw off anything in your housing element. It may depend somewhat on what it is that the council wants to add, what, if it's a program or a policy and what the implementation of that would look like.
So thank you. That's just where I was going. What can I add? Like,
I think you could add something along the lines of encouraging developers in the city to utilize union labor or whatever it is that your direction is. I would also suggest that Jeff Bradley from the M Group may know where in the element that type of language could live if in fact it belongs in the housing element. I haven't seen that language in a housing element that I've worked on. You could also, as part of your direction this evening, even if it's not in the element itself, indicate to staff that you want to review policies or other areas in which the city can encourage the use of union labor or encourage other types of labor standards that you may want to pursue.
okay. So I'll just go on the record that I'm supportive of language encouraging union labor. If it can be baked into, like, I think the suggestion was that, or someone made a comment that Redwood City has included it in its housing element. If it is possible, I'd like to see it. If it needs to happen in other ways or directions, I'm supportive of that too. I'm gonna pause for a moment.
I know this was your moment, Councilmember Combs, but I believe
No, don't be-
Councilmember Dorr wanted to
Yeah.
comment on this specific
Okay,
issue.
please go.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Combs. I pulled up that language from the Redwood City policy because it got me curious, and the language that they had it as a policy on one of the lists of policies, one of the goals. And it says, encourage developers and contractors to evaluate hiring local labor, hiring from or contributing to apprenticeship programs, increasing resources for labor compliance, and providing livable wages.
Yeah, so I'm supportive of that language and supportive of separately exploring ways in which we can encourage the use of union labor. So going on and so that said, I also wanted to talk about the anti-displacement measures. And so in some language, I've seen it refer to specifically in connection with Bellhaven, and some scenarios, I think that maybe was the recommendation from the Housing Planning Commission. And other places, it seemed more broad. So as it is part of the housing element, what are we, and I know that hasn't been finalized, but what is that language at the moment?
I'll pull that up so that we can read that out. I think so. To answer your question, I'll read off the first sentence. It's conduct outreach and meet with residents and organizations primarily in the Bellhaven neighborhood to develop an anti-displacement strategy that the City Council can adopt after review from the Housing Commission and Planning Commission.
And Mr. Smith, can you please reference which program or policy that is?
Certainly, it's program H2E.
Thank you.
And if I may, I would add that there was a recommendation to move that timeline up to implementation by January 2024.
Okay, and just so I'm understanding, like the additional elements in that was sort of increased or enhanced protections as it relates to just cause eviction and relocation assistance. So is that specific language in the housing element or in what's being proposed, or just a generic statement about anti-displacement and
Yes, so these items were added as items for It's sort of a list of potential policies that could be included in the
Mr.
anti-displacement.
Smith, is it possible to put on the screen that policy for everyone to see?
Sure, let me see.
It's on
Just one
page
second.
810.
All right. Located it and sharing my screen. And I would note it does cover a couple pages, so I think that covers it.
Okay, so it's my understanding that it's not, we're going into very specific sort of language as relates to this, this direction it provides to the city. And so I will say that like, all of the suggestions as it relates to anti-displacement measures outside of those that relate to relocation assistance and just cause eviction, I'm fine with. I do have a concern that, again, we're not making these changes in the housing element. What we are we are telegraphing an intention to make these changes in later discussion and where we're actually going to change the ordinances. That's my understanding. If I'm wrong, someone can always correct me. Like, my concern is that essentially we are making a decision now where that later discussion before council sort of becomes moot and almost a little bit of a farce because we've already said that we're going to do this. And so I have concerns about the legitimacy of that process to follow where we're actually changing the ordinance, where we're already sort of saying what direction we're going to go in. And then additionally, my concern is that one, I don't know if we've had the right engagement and outreach to the relevant stakeholders as it relates to essentially saying now that we're going to make that change later. And that is that like an engagement with specifically the landlord community, because we are essentially obligating them and putting additional financial responsibilities on them, which is not in general what the housing element process is about. Generally, it's about you identify opportunity sites and you change the zoning, of which then in a lot of cases increases the value of landowners. Here, we're engaged in an exercise where we are actually having what you could call a negative impact on people, a negative financial impact by increasing their obligations. And again, I don't know that we've had the discussion to really at this moment in time sort of indicate that we're going to make that decision later. And so I think as it relates to those elements, the language should be very generic in the sense that the city council intends to discuss these items in the future, which I think is valid. But I think it's problematic to, at this moment, like I say, to telegraph very specifically that we're going to, increase or enhance just cause eviction protections and enhance relocation assistance. So that's, and I'm almost there. Mayor Willison. And then my final point is a concern that I've had in the past, and I will, I will return to, and that is we've talked a lot about like sort of where development is and the fact that like a desire to spread out development throughout the city, and specifically through this process removed having development as part of this housing element in District 1, again, which I was very supportive of. I will only say that like essentially where we've identified a cluster of opportunity sites, which are probably most primed to being redeveloped into high density housing, is right on the doorstep of District 1. Right across the freeway, just like 100 yards or so. And so I do think it kind of speaks to some degree the hollowness of that talk of spreading development out of the city when we just jump the freeway and create a cluster of development opportunities right across from the area where we said we're not going to do development opportunities. And if I look at where in the city, and I do truly believe that all of the opportunity sites are really opportunity sites and can be developed. But if you look at, what's likely to be developed, it is more likely where you see light industrial warehouses in the sort of eastern northern portion of the city on both sides of the freeway. And it's not, it is not the class A commercial office space that's leased out for some of the, highest square footage rates in the country to venture capital companies like firms. Those places which we've identified are I'm not going to say not going to be developed, but are less likely to be developed. And the tilt up construction sort of warehouse is likely to be developed. And so what I think the result is going to be is that we're going to get more development concentrated in right in the area of the city where we said that we were trying not to develop. And so again, I just want to reiterate that I share that concern specifically as it relates to the opportunity sites off Marsh Road. And those are all of my comments.
Thank you, Councilmember Combs. So to follow up, because tonight is about action, your commentary is well taken.
But my commentary will result in action. 'Cause
Well,
it
what
will-
I'm asking-
It will result in my vote.
Well, what I'm asking for is if you're seeking any action based on the 3 comments you made. So starting with the last one, are you looking to remove certain sites? On the second one, are you looking to remove certain policies? And on the first one, are you looking to add the labor language? And if there's
Yeah, I thought I was
consensus-
very specific about that. I said with regards to, just going back, with regards to the anti-displacement, I said that we should be very generic in that language, and we should not sort of specifically telegraph what we're going to do. And so that I thought was very, very specific about. With the union language, I thought it was very specific in saying that I would like at minimum language encouraging the use of union labor to be included. I thought it was specific about that. And again, I think that the Marsh Road properties should be removed if there was some lack of clarity there, that I think that they should be removed from the housing element.
Okay, thank you. So then I guess because we're going off Councilmember Combs and he just spoke, would council like to see if there's consensus on the request that Councilmember Combs has, or move on to have each of us say the things we would like to discuss and then go through them all at once? Does anyone have any thoughts on process? Councilmember Nash.
So I would be happy to comment on the 3 items which Councilmember Combs brought up. And the first one, as long as it's fairly generic, saying encourage labor, I would fully support that. The second one on the anti-displacement, I believe that this has been out in the ethos for with everyone able to look at the anti-displacement strategy for months and months now. We have only received, that I have seen, comments encouraging us to go stronger with the anti-displacement. And I am comfortable with the anti-displacement. Well, I guess I would look to legal counsel, and if for any reason in the process in developing the programs and policies, we decided to change so that something had changed. We decided not to expand just cause eviction. I'm just pulling something out. We decided not to do something. Would we have boxed ourselves in by putting it into the housing element as specifically as we did?
Thank you, Councilmember Nash. So the language in the program that you have up on your screen, I believe includes some discretion for the council to consider. If you read the added highlighted language there, it indicates that the things that will be looked at will include policies that could do these following things. So it's not a mandate that you have to do them, but that you will explore, and it will include policies that could do these following things. So if the council is comfortable with that language, I think that that could address the issue. I think it's also important to understand that we did get comments from HCD specifically related to affirmatively furthering fair housing. I always have to take a moment to say that clearly, and included language regarding this program that we've addressed in the matrix that you have in your packet, where we went through each of the HCD comments and where in the element it was addressed. So it did not get into the level of detail that you have in your actual program. But I think that you do have a little bit of flexibility in the language that's included in program H2E.
So thank you very much. I am very comfortable with leaving the language in place. The only part that I would like to just ensure is that this does apply citywide whenever we do actually implement the programs. There are rentals throughout the city. I think it's one of the wonderful things about Menlo Park is they really rentals are not concentrated in any one area, although certainly the displacement does predominantly happen in District 1. But I think that it would be beneficial while we focus on District 1 and Bellhaven to, as we are writing these policies, that they actually become applicable across the entire city to anyone who would need them. Thank you. Oh, and finally, I believe that the housing opportunity sites as they are currently in the report should remain as such, and I would not be in favor of removing any at this point.
Yeah, I'd just like to chime in response because this city attorney or assistant city attorney mentioned that HED has commented, but housing elements aren't required to have displacement measures, right? And many of them throughout the dozens, probably most, don't actually have any displacement language or measures, correct?
If I may, through the mayor, this sixth cycle is different than all the previous cycles with the raft of new housing laws, and paramount among that is affirmatively furthering fair housing is for the first time in constant California law and specifically focused on implementation through this housing element process statewide. And so that's a big distinguishing feature when we think about what's in a housing element and what's not in a housing element. And our approach and HCD's approach is that in order to further fair housing, which is what we're talking about, you have to have we have to at least consider or work towards combating displacement and having anti-displacement policies. Can be a lot of discussion and debate about where those fall on the spectrum. But in my view, this program is mostly setting up a community engagement effort to get out in the community, find out what the issues are, what the problems are, explore the tools. Even rent control is just one tool to combat displacement of folks due to economic pressures. So it's not a hard physical impact related to the EIR as spoken to by the attorneys, but it is an important social issue that we can deal with through the housing element under that lens of furthering fair housing.
Okay, one final thing. I take issue with some of what you said, but I've already talked too much, and I just want to say one final comment because Councilmember Nash said that with regards to the displacement measures, it's been out there, and we've only got like four letters or something, or emails or correspondence in support. What? No. Okay, so maybe maybe it's 40 in support. I don't know, but what I will say is that there has not been specific engagement to the landlord community, right? And what we say in this measure is that we're going to do that, but we're going to do that after we already commit to increasing displacement, relocation assistance, and putting in place stricter, just cause restrictions. So then we're gonna reach out to landlords. It's a cart before the horse situation. You should actually reach out to landlords. And I promise you, if we had reached out to landlords directly about fees and said that the city council was essentially going to telegraph these changes, then I can promise you there would have been more communication. But I'm going to be quiet and not say anything else.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Combs. So, so Mayor Nash was in support of the labor thing and then would like to keep the displacement and the sites as is. So, Councilmember Dorr, do you have, because we're looking basically if there's 3 people who want something, that's what we're looking for.
Sure. In regards to labor standards, I really appreciate Councilmember Combs bringing that up. And if it's helpful, I tried to just now draft some language. I don't have a screen, but I wonder if someone could share the screen so folks who enjoy visual could take this down and see it. And that could be encourage developers and contractors to hire local and union labor and increase resources for labor compliance, safe work environments, and living wages. And as encouragement language, that is not a requirement, but it's an opportunity. And it sounds like that wouldn't have
It
an
looks like
impact
Mr.
on-
Smith has something to say about that.
Sure.
If it's in writing, it would be helpful. I could just type it out and put it up on the screen and add it to that list. If you have, that would be great.
So why don't you send that over as we continue to talk, Councilmember Dorr, and if you want to address whether or not you are, where you stand on the displacement and the sites.
Sure. I understand from HCD that in this housing element, we are set to help affirmatively support fair housing. And that one way to do that is through preserving existing affordable housing stock, and anti-displacement strategies are one way to preserve that affordable housing stock. And in the language that is in our housing element, it mentions will potentially, and it could include these tools. And so I think that provides enough flexibility that, you know, as we learn about those tools and do that community engagement, that hopefully Councilmember Combs, the folks that you mentioned would have a chance to contribute to the conversation as well. Because I hear, you know, they're also part of our community and we want to include everyone in those conversations. And the sites, on the sites, yes, I feel comfortable moving forward with the sites as they are. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Taylor, do you have any comments or weighing in on the labor standards, displacement, and sites?
Thank you, Mayor Willison. And I am comfortable with having the additional language to ensure or encourage union labor. I am supportive of the anti-displacement. And I'm not sure if this was a site, the one in District 2 that Councilmember Combs is referring to, if this was a site that the property owner agreed or disagreed with. So I don't know if there's any background that can be shared. That way I can make a.
I believe there was kind of 2 sets of sites near Marsh. One were opportunity sites originally put in, and then there was 3 additional sites that were asked to be put in and that we had removed per request. But I think these were the original ones that you're talking about removing it. Do I have that right, Councilmember Combs?
Yeah, so I think initially, like all of the sites off Marsh and the sort of Bohannon Drive area are all, there were multiple sites. And then for a city council meeting, we removed those sites specifically owned by Bohannon. I thought at the time the action that we were taking is that we were removing all of the sites in the Bohannon Drive area. But there was a miscommunication between Bohannon Drive area and sites actually owned by Bohannon. I don't know like why that ever would have been a legitimate distinction, that we would have removed sites from based on specifically being owned by Bohannon. I don't know like what logic that would have been based on. In my thinking, it was always all of these sites in this area, because I don't know what we gain by specifically removing the Bohannon sites, the Bohannon owned sites but then keeping all of the other sites on Bohannon Drive. If anything, if I were Bohannon, I actually would have like some cause for concern of why I was being picked on specifically, and my property was being removed. Again, for me, I understood it as all of the Bohannon Drive sites, but we are where we are.
So I guess the feedback we're looking for Councilmember Taylor is whether you're comfortable that there are sites remaining at all off Marsh Road, or whether you're in favor of Councilmember Combs' request of removing all sites in that Marsh area.
Thank you. And at this time, honestly, I don't have an opinion on it.
That's fine, Councilmember Taylor. So I'll go through mine and that might just resolve this once and for all. So I support the labor encouragement language that we've been discussing, and I believe Councilmember Dorr is communicating with staff now about the specifics. I'm comfortable with the displacement language as is, because I think there will be community outreach with the landlord community, and that there's a lot of coulds and a lot of wiggle room in there as has been discussed. And I would like to keep the site inventory list as is, because this is what we've been working with throughout this process. So that's where we are. Mr. Smith, did you want to go over so we can wrap up that labor language now? Are you prepared to bring that forward?
Yes, I'll pull that up on the screen. So there's a new item at the bottom, which is encourage developers and contractors to hire local and union labor and increase resources for labor compliance, safe work environments, and living wages. And the suggestion from Councilmember Dorr was that that could be under a new policy H72 on page 8-38.
Okay, and to clarify, is staff comfortable with that being added tonight at this 11th or 10:59th hour, whatever we're calling it?
Yes, I don't think we have any reservations about that.
Okay, and then is everyone okay with that language up here? Okay, great. Then is there another council member that would like to speak about the housing element? Councilmember Dorr.
Thank you, Mayor Willison. I suppose I also have a few higher level questions that I'd like to ask the staff about. In our housing element, there is significant mention about energy efficiency and the importance of that in work with developers and housing. And I wonder the place of water efficiency and reuse, and just curious why it's not explicitly mentioned or called out the same way that energy efficiency is. Would appreciate any
And
insights
can you
there.
please reference the policy or program you're referring to?
Yes, thank you. I would like to go find those, and I can come back to my comments. I'd be happy to give the space over to a different council person. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Taylor, would you like to speak now?
Not at this time, Mayor Wilson.
Okay. Vice Mayor, Councilmember Nash, your turn.
So at this point, we are giving overall feedback.
So it's really, I think if there's things you want, like the things on the spreadsheet that you may have already submitted to staff, if you want to walk us through those. And then if there's anything additional that you want to comment on or add.
Okay. Could staff please put them back up? I can do them from memory, but it probably would be more productive to do it. Well, the first one I know is related to the fact that we've been redistricted. And so it's just indicating on the opportunity site sheets the correct district, because there were, here we go. Actually, it's on the Thank you. Yes, it's so ID number 8. And so there were sites 14, 19, 43, 55, and 61 are now in District 4. They were formerly in District 3. And I believe those were the only sites that actually changed districts with the redistricting. And so it's just updating that to our current district lines. So that's one change. Another change is number 10 was there were certain sites that were actually in anyway, there were certain sites that are not in our highest performing school districts. And so it was, I like the change that the staff said, where the vast majority of the sites designated for affordable housing are located in high performing school districts, rather than previously it had specified only 2 sites were in that. And on H4G, I was proposing adding affordable housing. The Housing and Planning Commission had already proposed putting in prioritize housing on city-owned land, and I was proposing that we add prioritize affordable housing on city-owned parking lots downtown. So basically to emphasize the fact that we are looking for affordable housing on our city-owned land. And then I think there was one more, which just a global change. When I was looking through the document, I was specifically looking at H4E and realized that not all that policy had changed, and, or excuse me, the program 4E had changed, and it was a matter of just updating it so that it reflected the change from ministerial review to streamlined project review, because the program number was reused. And I actually have one more, if you're interested, if you want, which I found and forgot to provide to you, and that's on, it was on page 7-24. I don't know exactly where that is, but it said many sites are also located near Menlo Park VA Medical Center, which is crucial infrastructure for veterans. And I don't believe that there actually are many sites located near the Menlo Park VA Medical Center. And you may do with that what you want. I just wanted to mention that. So beyond my comments beyond that yes, so I will stop there. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that was it. Good.
Thank you, Councilmember Nash. I think we're basically going exactly in the reverse order that I had laid out before. So we'll go through all the council member comments, and then we'll go back to the planning and housing, and then we'll go back to the EIR. So it sounds like Councilmember Nash, if I'm right, about 4 of your things seemed pretty straightforward. One was cleaning up the redistricting, saying vast majority, changing ministerial to streamline or vice versa, and then something about clarifying the VA hospital. So is there any concerns with those changes? Is everyone okay with those modifications? Vice Mayor Taylor, did you have any issues with those?
No, I do not.
Okay, great. So then the one that might want to be discussed is about the parking lots downtown. So it sounds like the changing housing to affordable housing and changing public land specifically to parking lots. Is everybody okay with that, or does anyone want to discuss those changes? Vice Mayor Taylor, any comment on those?
I'm fine with it.
Okay, so then I guess the direction for staff is to move forward with Councilmember Nash's recommended changes. Thank you, Councilmember Nash. We'll move on now to Councilmember Dorr.
Thank you, Mayor Willison. Okay, I'm looking at the housing element redraft from January 6th, the red line version. And it has a list of policies on page 836 under goals, policies, and programs. And here, goal H6 is sustainable housing. And so it goes through siting development, resilient design, renewable energy, promote energy efficiency, et cetera. And there's no mention of water. And so water efficiency and water reuse and conservation. And I was just curious from the staff, first of all, whether state housing element law specifically calls out energy efficiency and specifically does not call out water efficiency, or how that is showing up in state housing law, because this could also be a comment that is better placed elsewhere outside of the housing element.
So if I may, there is a requirement, and I'll read just a couple sentences of it to you. So it's Government Code Section 65583A7 that requires an assessment of housing needs and inventory of resources and constraints relevant to the meeting of these needs. And then it says, the assessment and inventory shall include the following: an analysis of opportunities for energy conservation with respect to residential development. And so that's why that is specifically called out. It is a requirement that we address that. Whereas water was not one of those items in the government code that was added.
And just to further clarify, the way the housing element laws are this cycle is that we just need to analyze that water and sewer capacity would not be a constraint to housing development. And so that's what we did for water and sewer. And then again, like what Mr. Smith has said, we had to address potential opportunities for energy conservation.
So is the housing element not the appropriate place then to put that in? Or if we wanted to put that in, is that possible?
It could be added to the housing element as a policy recommendation. I would note that, for instance, in the Bayfront zoning districts that we do have more specifics around the zoning piece, and that requires water budgets and reduction measures and things like that. So it could go in the housing element and then become a further discussed item to get into more details later on in the zoning discussion.
Councilmember Doors, what's your preference on this item?
Thank you. I'm curious for discussion with my fellow council members. Thinking about the encouragement language that was put in place around labor, I'm curious if others would be interested in joining me in having some no requirement encouragement language for developers or for everyone to encourage water conservation in both new and existing residences, kind of building upon the language that is currently here for energy efficiency, and encourage to promote this in existing homes and those new developments.
I'm seeing a thumbs up from Councilmember Nash. Councilmember Combs?
I have no objection. Is this not to some degree achieved in our REACH codes or REACH building codes? But it doesn't matter. I'm supportive.
Okay, Vice Mayor Taylor, any thoughts?
I'm supportive.
Okay, great. It looks like you have support from council to add that in. If staff's okay and we're okay, then it's okay.
Okay, thank you. I can draft some language quickly. I will also comment on the few matrix changes, if we could pull that up on the screen regarding green spaces. Great. And so in the first one under page 836, we had mentioned open spaces, flood mitigation, recreation. We hadn't specifically called out green spaces, which under some names is considered different. And green spaces just, it means someone that has a plant and green growing. So like parks and open spaces, or green spaces like that. So parks, and I thought it might be helpful to specifically call that out, given the importance of those spaces. And then the other site is on page 716, where there was a short sentence that said the city council decided not to pursue housing development in the parks and the civic center site. And I thought it might be helpful for fellow residents, for the city, and for others to know why we made that choice. Happy to revise this language, but having some explanation as to why, given the importance of those sites or et cetera, would appreciate the council members' thoughts on that. Thank you.
What are your thoughts? Thumbs up from Nash? Thumbs up from Combs. Vice Mayor Taylor, any?
I'm supportive.
Okay, I am too. So as long as staff is okay with that one, great. Anything else, Councilmember Dorr?
No, thank you.
Okay, Vice Mayor Taylor, you're up for anything in the housing element document.
At this time, Mayor Willison, I don't have anything else to add.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Taylor. So it's my turn. I don't think I had anything on those spreadsheets, did I?
There was one item for the CEQA resolution.
For CEQA, did I have any on? Oh, there was something about a school district that didn't exist. So is everyone okay with us removing the school district that doesn't exist? Okay, I'm gonna just, yeah.
I suppose I'm curious how that ended up in the housing element.
Because it's hundreds of pages and people make mistakes.
Yes.
Okay, we'll just, some things just happen. Okay, we're gonna move on. So before we kind of move on, our next step is gonna be moving on to the Planning and Housing Commission recommendations. Any other council thoughts before we tackle those? Okay, we are moving on. So I'm actually gonna ask staff to please put up the matrix that had those recommendations. So these are the Planning Commission ones. We'll just go down this list. Yes. With the councilman one? Oh, so first, Mr. Smith and the rest of our city staff, can you confirm that the recommendations from the Planning and Housing Commission are acceptable to include as tonight prior to adoption? Are there any concerns that council should know of for any of these recommended changes?
So staff would be comfortable with all of the recommendations. Aside from the program H4G downtown parking lots implementation, we had two different recommendations from Planning Commission and Housing Commission. In the staff report, we did recommend the Housing Commission recommendation, which would initiate a feasibility study in this year, 2023. And so that was our recommendation between the two of them.
Thank you. And I think we can talk about that that item when we get to it, going down the list. But it sounds like all the other recommendations are acceptable.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will make our way down this list. So for those of you following along at home on page 811, we're starting with program H2E, the anti-displacement strategy. And the recommendation from the Planning Commission here was to move up the June 2024 strategy to January 2024 and to begin addressing these policies. To move up the priority ones up 6 months and then to move up the other ones by a year. So basically it's just expediting to prevent as much displacement as possible. And as long as those are comfortable with staff, which it sounds like they are, is council comfortable with that recommendation of expediting? Councilmember Combs.
Yeah, so I would just add that like, as it specifically relates to the Bellhaven neighborhood, what we're mostly talking about is single family detached homes being rented. And I just think we have to be careful because there is a really sort of short barrier to those being moved from the rental market and just being sold, right? And so I do think as we look at these displacement strategies, as they, specifically target Bellhaven, we have to be like mindful of that. We're not talking about duplexes or fourplexes. We're talking about people renting houses. And the more burden we put on landlords, I think the more likely they will just sell. And then a person who could afford to rent now doesn't have a home.
Thank you. Councilmember Nash.
Well, I remember when we were looking at these policies before that they did not apply to all homes because of, I cannot remember the name of the, yes, thank you, Costa Hawkins. So will that still apply in this, just generally, not to get into the program, but just generally, will Costa Hawkins still apply, or has there been some change to that law?
Yeah, so taking a step back, the program that's yet to be developed must comply with all state law, which includes Costa Hawkins, that precludes a city from price controls and rent control on single-family homes.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or am I seeing thumbs up, thumbs down on accepting the Planning Commission's recommendation of expediting these changes? I see a nod from Councilmember Nash, nod from Dorr, a shrug. Is that a yes or I'm a yes. So, okay, we got a thumbs up and I'm not, so Vice Mayor Taylor, yes.
I'm supportive.
Okay, wonderful. Moving on. Page 824, we're on Program HD to modify the affordable housing overlay. So they changed the language towards the end, saying providing for densities of 100 units an acre or greater. So I think this was a reflection of the fact that we are going to have a zoning conversation in this year, and that there may be a need to increase that from the 100 units an acre that was originally contemplated for this housing element. And so they wanted to not preclude that in conversations about the affordable housing overlay. So any discussion, or are folks comfortable with that flexible language? I'm seeing a nod from Councilmember Nash. I see Vice Mayor Taylor.
I'm supportive.
Okay. Nod from Councilmember Dorr. I'm also supportive. Councilmember Nash, do you want to say anything?
I just want to reiterate what you just said, that this is just leaving the door open as we go into the zoning discussions, that this is a possibility.
Thank you, Councilmember Nash. We have the majority supporting. Do you want to express a thought about this, Councilmember Combs? Okay. So moving on. Okay, so this is the one that we've been waiting for. Page 826, program H4G, which is, we've already changed the title to Councilmember Nash's suggested language. So it's now going to be prioritize park affordable. Yeah, why don't you say?
Prioritize affordable housing on city-owned parking lots downtown.
Okay, thank you. So we've addressed the title, which was one of the recommendations. And then their other recommendations were really about, for the most part, the timing. And so I listened in, I think some of us or most of us listened in on the conversation, and just taking a moment to thank very much the Housing and the Planning Commission. Oh my gosh, these commissioners take this job very seriously, and the richness of their conversation and study is much appreciated. But both of the commissions expressed the importance of the downtown city-owned parking lots in our strategy for the housing element and to just generate affordable housing. And everybody wanted to see this done sooner than later. I know staff has taken a hard look and really looked at the capacity that we have in our staff, the other priorities that are on the city's plate, especially those that are hitting the community development department and the staff members who would be working on this type of effort. And they are letting us know that the timing that the Housing Commission versus the Planning Commission. So we're looking at the Planning Commission recommendation, which is basically wanting to see things, I think, like this year, that's just not feasible. And so the Housing Commission timeline, can you switch to the Housing Commission slide for a moment? They're saying that the Housing Commission is actually doable. So the bottom cell here, and I apologize if those of you who are watching at home are having a hard time reading this, but essentially just the timing is more what staff believes they can accomplish. So given all that, does the council want to discuss this, or are you comfortable with the timing proposed and approved by staff here, or by the Housing Commission and approved by staff? So I'm seeing a nod from Councilmember Nash. Vice Mayor Taylor.
I'm supportive.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor Taylor. And I do want to reiterate that all of us obviously don't want to see any of our residents displaced, and that we'd love to do this yesterday. We just have to live in the real world on what can actually get accomplished when. Councilmember Dorr?
I'm supportive.
Okay, and Councilmember Combs?
I'm not unsupportive.
Okay. Okay, we're moving on. So if you can please go back to the Planning Commission list. We are now going to page 828, program H4M, which is about parking requirements. And actually, Mr. Smith, can you point out what is changing about this item?
Sure. There was a mention of a parking or alternative transportation in lieu fee, and they wanted to confirm that that would be utilized towards improvements that are non-personal automobile related.
Got it. I see it. It's now underlined. It was hard to see there. So Councilmember Nash is in support. I'm in support of that. Councilmember Dorr, Vice Mayor Taylor.
I'm supportive.
Okay.
I'm supportive.
And Councilmember Combs. Okay, great. We're moving on. That one got approval. Page 838, program H6F, transit incentives. And this one was removing the reference to particularly in areas further away from transit. And in watching this discussion, it was an acknowledgement that everybody, whether they live near or far, could use some strategies and incentives to use transit. So I'm in support of that. Councilmember Nash, Councilmember Combs, Councilmember Dorr.
I'm supportive.
And Taylor, great. And then the last one from the Planning Commission was 836. They were proposing a new program, which is being referred to as H5H, Tenant Readiness Education Program. And this would be to develop a program to partner with a community organization to offer educational classes to prospective or existing tenants on how to find and get affordable housing, so they understand the application process and just the rental process in general, learning about fair housing regulations, and identifying other resources for financial and legal assistance related to rental housing. And in part of the discussion on this at the Planning Commission, they were talking about sometimes when the application period for affordable housing opens, it doesn't open for a very long time. So if folks aren't comfortable with the process of applying, they might lose that window. So it's helping people get ready so they can take advantage when those affordable housing opportunities come forward. I think it sounds like a great program. I'm in support. Councilmember Nash is in support. Did you want to say anything?
And I think a specific focus is trying to keep our residents in Menlo Park. So helping the residents in Menlo Park to be ready to take advantage of these, the applications timing, as you were talking about, but specifically to try and keep people housed in Menlo Park.
Thank you, Councilmember Nash. Councilmember Combs. He's happy with it. Councilmember Dorr, Vice Mayor Taylor.
I'm supportive.
Okay, great. So we have gone through the Planning Commission recommendations. We're moving on to the Housing Commission recommendations. I think we only have two left. On page 824, program H4D is to modify. Actually, Mr. Smith, can you point out exactly what's changing here on H4D from the Housing Commission?
So this is the program H4D is modifying the affordable housing overlay. It would add a sentence to the end of the description of that program to evaluate processing fee waivers, deferral of fees, or other potential ways to reduce fees for affordable housing development that occurs on AHO sites.
Thank you. And we had one of our housing commissioners talking about this and how oftentimes an affordable housing developer has to outlay quite a bit of money. And so sometimes that can be a barrier to producing the affordable housing. So if the city has the ability to defer or waive, but kind of looking at ways to move out of the way so that affordable housing developers can indeed develop affordable housing. So that's what that's about. Councilmember Dorr, are you in support of the Housing Commission recommendation? Yes. Vice Mayor, Councilmember Nash, Councilmember Combs, great. And
I'm supportive.
great. And Vice Mayor Taylor is. Okay. And our final recommendation is page 836, adding a new program, H5G. And this would be inserting a racial equity training program, partnering with an organization such as GARE, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, to provide training and organizational capacity to address racial inequity and advance opportunities. I know we had talked about GARE before as a council, so this is just putting it into the housing element. Any thoughts, comments about this? Getting a thumbs up. Another thumbs up. Yes, Vice Mayor Taylor.
Thank you. I thought we discussed the real. And this was maybe 2.5 years ago, quite possibly.
City Manager Murphy, or does someone from staff want to address it?
Yes, please, Mayor, I will. Yes, the city has discussed multiple programs. So, and most recently, I'd say it'd be the National League of Cities REAL program. So, in reviewing this proposal, it says such as GARE. So the way I would read it is we're committed to partnering with a program. It may be GARE, it may be NLC REAL, or it may be something else. So if we want to be more explicit about those various options, I'm happy to consider that. But I can say that's the staff's intent with this.
Vice Mayor Taylor, would you like to modify it, or are you comfortable?
No, I'm comfortable.
Okay, I'm comfortable as well. Okay, it looks like we have consensus up here. So I believe we've made it through all of the Housing Commission and Planning Commission recommendations. So I think we've kind of talked about the housing element document before we move on, and just making sure we're okay here. Is it okay if we continue just to discuss and get consensus on things, and then at the very end to do our votes on both the housing element adoption and the EIR?
Yes.
Okay, great. So before we move on to the EIR, are there any other comments about the housing element document itself? Yes, Councilmember Nash.
I just have a comment about the Housing Commission, these recommendations we were just looking at. And first of all, thank you so much to staff who has really pushed the dates on these. very much appreciated. And then a comment to the Housing Commission and Planning Commission and many people who wrote in, as Mayor Willison stated, people are eager to have these programs started. And I know that we need to be realistic about the dates. And so I'm comfortable with what staff has proposed. And I know that if any of these dates can be expedited in the process of, they will be, but we need to, I appreciate that these are dates that staff felt were realistic. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Nash. And as we continue to fill vacant positions and find opportunities, I'm sure staff will update us. And these are commitments that we're making to the Housing and Community Development Department at the state. And so I think it's staff that wants to be very realistic. But I have no doubt they will work and expedite if they find opportunities. So thanks. Okay, then if there's no other comments about the housing element, we're going to move on to comments about the EIR. I know I had two. Were there any other comments about the EIR that folks wanted to make? Councilmember Dorr, was there anything about the EIR? I saw nothing from Councilmember Combs. Councilmember Nash. Okay, nothing from Councilmember Nash. Vice Mayor Taylor, anything regarding the EIR?
At this time, Mayor Willison, no.
Okay, great. So staff has kindly put up the comments that I made. So I was suggesting two edits here on staff report page C 1.72, which references page 64 of the resolution certifying the EIR. And these were to add language referencing that the village character comment was coming from the 2012 downtown specific plan. And then also expanding the rationale for why the low VMT alternative was not the selected alternative because of our desire to spread the housing opportunities throughout council districts 2 through 5. So I'm looking if there's support. I see Councilmember Nash supporting. Any other? I see Councilmember Combs, Councilmember Dorr, Vice Mayor Taylor. Any questions or comments?
I'm supportive.
Okay, great. And then I just wanted to make one comment, which isn't a change, but this is in reference to page C 114 of the staff report, which corresponds to page 6 of the EIR resolution, where it, a lot of pages here. It's explaining the housing site inventory strategies and going through how we are going to have those sites, what the project, EIR project that was studied basically contained. And it talked about increasing the densities in the downtown specific plan to allow at least 30 dwelling units an acre. And that would might potentially increase the maximum bonus level density to 80 units an acre. And it also talks here about having the affordable housing overlay being at 100 density units an acre. And so just so that the public knows, we've mentioned this before, but we're going to be having zoning conversations instead of concurrently doing our zoning modifications with this adoption tonight. We are giving ourselves the allotted time that the state gives us to have community conversations and council discussions about zoning. And I just want to point out that the EIR studies certain zoning numbers, but that in the course of our conversations and discussions, there is the possibility that these densities may change. And if that happens, we will have to, or staff, we're not going to do it, that staff will have to determine whether that may bring about additional environmental impacts that may require further study. But that what we are certifying tonight was based on certain assumptions that we are certifying tonight, but that we may have addendums to that if needed as we move forward with our zoning conversations. So it's nothing to add to the resolution or anything tonight. I just wanted to put a pin in that for folks, because they might see that and think that's what we're sticking with, and we might, but we might indeed need to modify that. Are there any other comments about the EIR? Councilmember Combs.
Yeah, just for clarity, when we talk about that modification and addendums, as I understand it, it's a one-way street, and that is increased density, right? We're not talking about anything going the opposite way.
Yes, because I believe these are basically promises to the state that at a minimum, we're going to be hitting these numbers. Thanks for the clarification. Are there any other discussion points or comments, questions about the EIR? Then I would look to staff. I guess we're back where we started. We've gone completely in reverse. And from what you said earlier, we are required to initially certify the EIR. So somebody needs to make a motion to that effect. Okay, so do you have a question? Okay, so is there a motion to certify, adopt a resolution certifying the EIR?
I would make a motion to certify the EIR.
Okay, Councilmember Dorr, is there a second?
I'd be happy to second.
Thank you, Ms. Sandoval.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Willison. We have a motion by Councilmember Dorr and second by Councilmember Nash to adopt a resolution certifying the environmental impact report. Is there any further council discussion or questions? Okay, by roll call.
Yeah, pardon me for interrupting, Madam City Clerk and Mayor Willison, if I may.
Yes,
Just
please.
to clarify that motion includes the modification that you had recommended on the low VMT alternative to add the language regarding
Thank
2012.
you. I'm seeing nods from the motion maker and the seconder. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, City Attorney. To certify the environmental impact report, including the modifications as they were laid out in this meeting. Is that okay to say? Thank you. Okay, by roll call vote, Councilmember Combs,
No.
Councilmember Dorr,
Yes.
Councilmember Nash,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Taylor,
Yes.
and Mayor Willison.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes with Councilmember Combs dissenting.
Thank you. So now that we have certified the EIR, I will entertain a motion to, Mr. Smith.
If I may, I wanted to make sure that I pulled up the language that received from Councilmember Dorr on the water usage for the housing element.
Thank you. Are you putting that up now?
Yes. So in this last row, it is encourage improved and/or increased water conservation and reuse in the community. Encourage developers to employ water conservation and reuse measures and share what these measures are in new developments. Promote water conservation and reuse in existing homes. And that would be on page 8-36 under goal H6.
Okay, I'm seeing nods that that's acceptable. And okay, we'll go ahead with that language. So I guess whoever is making the motion to adopt the resolution approving the housing element should make reference to the changes as noted in the spreadsheet and that had consensus this evening. So is there a motion maker for this item?
I will make the motion with the changes as read in.
Thank you, Councilmember Nash. Is there a second? I can go ahead and second that.
Thank you, Mayor Willison. We have a motion on the floor by Councilmember Nash, seconded by Mayor Willison to adopt a resolution approving the housing element, including changes as noted and discussed in this meeting. Do I have that correct? Thank you very much. Any further council discussion or questions? By roll call vote, Councilmember Combs?
I'll just say there are a number of things I very much appreciate and like about the housing element, but there are some things of which I have significant concerns about. And so my vote is again, no.
Councilmember Dorr?
Yes.
Councilmember Nash?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Mayor Willison?
Yes.
And the motion passes with Councilmember Combs dissenting.
Okay, so I think there are a lot of cities in the area holding these types of meetings tonight, and we might be one of the earlier ones that are done. So thank you to everyone who participated in this process over the last 2-ish years, to our residents and stakeholders for staying engaged and for being so involved in your civic government. And stay tuned for the environmental justice and safety elements and also for conversations related to zoning. Vice Mayor Taylor.
Mayor Willison, I did not have my hand raised.
Sorry about that.
My apologies.
That's okay.
So with that, at 8:33, we are going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you.